An age ago, the beating heart of our people was a king who knew only victory. He wanted nothing more than an honorable death on the battlefield. Yet, none could match him, and so he wandered the earth, becoming lost in time and tide. Then we too lost our honest purpose, while silk-clad men sat upon the throne. But tremble now, all cities that lay under the stars, for out of the shadows and mists of the land of promise, our courage has been rekindled, our heart has returned, and the world will burn.
Okay, I'm gonna try this again. I was talking with the mute on. If you can hear me in the comments, let me know, please, and thank you. I've had a little trouble with my mic, so it got a little messed up here. So if anybody can hear me in the chat, just let me know. I decided to have a little bit of an earlier live stream this week. Sometimes um, I can't determine when I'm going to do it, but this week, Tony, thank you very much. Yeah, loud and clear. Thank you. Thank you. This week I had a little bit of extra time, so I figured I'd do it earlier live stream just to see if I can pull in some extra people or people who can't usually stay up that late on the East Coast, things like that. So tonight I'm going to do my usual thing. I'm going to talk a lot about um, comics and making comics and appreciating comics. And I changed, if you noticed, I changed the name of the stream to Make Comics Fun Again. Because honestly, I think that's what is missing. Yes, I want to geek out about comics, and I was thinking I want to keep it that, but at the same time, what is really missing in comics is the fun, quite honestly. And that's one of the small little things I wanted to touch on today. So, um, as I said, as I usually do, I gave you my Crom the Destroyer trailer number one at the beginning of this live stream. I tried to give that before we start, and links for that and for my other two graphic novels, superhero graphic novels, Thomas Valiant and the Valiant Heroes. They are all in the description. The links for those if you want to go order any of those. Also, if you follow me on Twitter, and I think my Twitter handle is in the description as well, I repost a couple of things so far that Renzo has given me the first couple of pages, just little snippets here and there from Thomas Valiant number two, which he has already started working on. So just a little update there. So as usual, I'm going to just ramble. How you doing, John? John's Longbox is in the chat for once. Thanks for coming, John. So I'm going to talk about comics for the next 20 minutes, what I usually do, and then I'm going to go through all of your comments. And if you have any comments for me, have any questions, anything at all, just put them in the chat and tag me by saying RJ or put a question mark at the end. Let me know that the question is for me, because after a while people start talking to each other in the chat and sometimes they get confused. So I want to talk about, as I usually do, the great things about comics and making comics and appreciating comics. And last week I talked about panel layout, and this week I want to talk about something similar. And I'm going to put some panel layout, just some panels in the background. I guess it's not a whole lot of panel layout until you hear what I have to say, but I'm going to put this up in the background a couple of times anyways. So I realized something. What I was doing was, over the last week, I was listening to and reading interviews with those image creators in the 90s. Well, really, it was the late 80s when I was probably, when these interviews were made, not when I was listening to them, but when these interviews were made, it was late 80s, and they were doing interviews early 90s with these people, creators who are from Image, Rob Liefeld, Todd McFarlane, Jim Lee, Willis Portico, if that's how you say his name, all these creators who went on to go and found Image. And everybody knows, if you follow my channel at all, that I would prefer the 80s style of comics than the 90s style of comics. But that's not to say that we can't learn something valuable from the 90s comics. And that's kind of what I wanted to touch on today. Because going over those interviews from the late 80s, early 90s, you got to see the switch over from the older way of making comics to the, well, let's just call it the Image way of making comics. And the reason why I like the 80s way of making comics is because it has much more of a story feel to it. The older comics were very heavy on dialogue, very heavy on word balloons, everything like that. The 90s comics were very light on that. And it's something that you can just see within the books themselves. And I really am someone who enjoys the story, the deep story. So your 80s comics were, well, I would say, not just digging themselves out, but already had dug themselves out of the campiness of the 60s and the 50s before that. During the 70s, Marvel especially was picking up speed within its storytelling. And you got, who was it? Jim Shooter come in to really make it a well-oiled machine for storytelling, all that kind of stuff. That's why I love those kinds of books, and DC was catching up as well. But they were still sticking to the older form of how to tell things sequentially and how to lay out panels and pages and things like that. But when your 90s guys came in, they took an entirely different tack of how to lay out a page and what to do with it. Now, I don't know this for sure, but from some of the interviews and what I would see from these pages and listen to what they have to say, I would say that what the changeover was from your 80s style to your 90s style with these Image 90s style was the fact that these guys, again, Todd McFarlane, Rob Liefeld, Jim Lee, all those guys, they were very much enamored with, well, what would you call it? It is graphic design, really. And if you haven't lived through the 80s, and I mean, remember all of the 80s, you probably don't know how big graphic design was back in the 80s. I mean, it was a major thing. You saw it everywhere. You saw major shifts in what people were doing. I remember this was probably like, I don't know when it was, last Christmas or something like that. I was at my mother's house, and she still has the old World Book encyclopedias and the yearly updates. And I pulled out like 1986, and there was just this random page that I flipped to, and there was a full page graphic design of the article. And I just looked at it and went, wow, that's 80s. And then I showed it to some of my relatives who were, much younger than me, not even in their 20s yet. And they went, what the heck is going on here? Because they had no idea how 80s graphic design actually worked, because it was a thing to behold. A lot of the stuff that you see and remember with the pastels and the big hair and all that kind of stuff, you see it in older movies. Yeah, graphic design was at the forefront of some of that. But anyways, the Image guys were very much into graphic design, and they wanted to incorporate graphic design into the page layout and what they were trying to do when they were laying out a story and a page. And they did that in very unique ways by using things like taking parts of the person, or let's say the cape of a character, and using that as a panel border, that kind of thing. That's more graphic design than your normal page layout. Um, there's many different kinds of ways that they did it, but that's the one that just comes to my mind. But within these interviews that I went over, the very interesting thing about it is the fact that they all said the same thing. In order to get into Marvel, first they had to know the basics. And the basics were the old way of making comics, which was in the 80s and earlier than that, which are normal panel layout, all that kind of stuff. And once they got in there and they said, you weren't getting in unless you proved that you could get the basics down, which is vastly different from what you see today. But anyway, that's what they talked about and how you couldn't get through the door unless you knew the basics of panel layout and all that kind of stuff, where you would put in, a very healthy amount of storytelling within the art, especially if you're trying to get into Marvel. But they got in there and then they said, talk to their editor or the people in charge and said, look, I don't really want to do this traditional way of panel layout, things like that. I want to incorporate some graphic design into it. And the people at Marvel, especially, said, yeah, okay, go ahead. You go ahead and do that. And they did that, and it worked spectacularly well for them. But at the same time, they go on to say that in order to put in this graphic design, which was something new at the time, with these large characters, using the characters as panel boundaries, all these kinds of things, many, I will say, much less for the number of panels usually on a page, that kind of thing, a lot of splash pages, all this. When they did that, they had to concentrate, and this is what they specifically say, and I think it was Rob Liefeld and Todd McFarlane together talking in this one interview, and they said they had to focus so much more on the basics in order to get this new kind of storytelling to work. And those basics were not the things that they wanted to change, of course. They wanted to change from the normal square panels and all that kind of stuff and put in this graphic design, which had different kinds of panels. But they needed to, again, adhere to some of the basic things that you don't even think about usually when you're reading a comic, if you're a comic reader, anyways. And one of those basic things that they go over and over again, and you'll see some of it here within these pictures that I'm showing, I tried to give you some examples, is the Z layout for how to read a comic. Because you need to follow the Z layout. Even with this graphic design put in and all these large characters and these things that they're trying to put in, they still, not even still, let me read that up one more time and you'll see what I'm talking about from these first pictures. They still had to focus on things like very simplistic Z layouts in a way that incorporated that graphic design. So here's my thing that I wanted to talk about this week and what brought to my mind about comics. I did a video probably the first year of my channel, so about 5 years ago now, maybe even earlier. And it was Marvel, and they were doing a series on the there was Marvel Twitter page. I don't think it was on marvel.com. It might have been. But anyways, they were doing one of their podcasts, which they've now abandoned. And they were talking about how to read a comic. And I'm thinking, no, I made fun of that thing severely when it came out. It's like, how does a person not know how to read a comic? That doesn't make any sense to me. And of course, that doesn't make any sense to me because I've always read comics and things like that. Things like that. I mean, comic, even stuff like you read in the newspaper, your funnies, things like that. They give you the basics for how to read a comic. And here's the thing with what's going on today and how much you have computers and different kinds of apps sticking in your face from your computer to your phone, everything like that. I think that we're losing the ability for people to innately understand how to read a comic. Not only because people don't read comics anymore, and if you want to get into it, you're going to have to start from scratch and learn how to read a comic. So I might have been a little bit too harsh on Marvel at the time, but really I don't think so, because if they just concentrated on their normal audience, they wouldn't have to teach people how to read comics. And that normal audience would then, give it to their children, and their children would learn from their father and mother. Marvel didn't have to teach them to read a comic. But anyway, my point being that people are losing the basics of how to read a comic. And I even got this question in one of my chats here about how do I read a North American comic? And I don't know who asked me that question. If you're in the comments now, just let me know that's you. But again, so first of all, you get everything that you have within your normal computer or cell phone setup, where you have apps all over the place, you have windows, everything coming in left, right, and center. So that breaks down the normal idea of how to read something in English, how to read a comic. On top of that, people are getting out of comics. And on top of that, you got manga coming in, and manga doesn't read in the Z pattern, which you're seeing on screen here. Manga reads if well, it reads from right to left and from top to bottom. And within North American comics, you're going from left to right and then again to the bottom left and then to your right again. And that's not the way that a lot of manga is set up. So you get these people who are familiar with manga and they don't know how to read a North American comic. Because, well, used to be that manga would be flipped if you were going to reprint it in North America. That's what they used to do within like Innovation and the 80s. Well, say, what is it? Not genres, but the companies that republished manga in the 80s, which I would buy. What they typically did was they took the manga page and they put it, in a normal comic layout, and then they would flip the page so that it would actually follow more the Z pattern of a North American comic. But my point is, again, that people are losing this ability to understand how to read a comic in this Z pattern. And this is one of the things that Will Eisner talks about with the fundamentals of sequential storytelling. He says we have a language of understanding for reading pictorials. And it's not just words, it's words and pictures because he's talking about sequential art. One of these basic things that he takes as a given is that people understand you start on the left, you go to the right, and then you go back to the left in a Z pattern and then to the right. This is one of the givens that he almost just passes by without even talking about. And again, most people would think that this is a natural way to think, but it's not. And it's certainly not today when you get so many competing ideas of how to read something. So, this is what I think that, one of the things that the image guys, why I wanted to talk about them, is because they were using different kinds of panel layouts in their incorporation of graphic design. And they would do things that would draw the eye down into the Z pattern. And Rob Liefeld himself talks about this and how, let's say, the one he described in the interview that I was reading was the fact that he would have a large panel on the top. So it's a large panel goes from side to side on the top of the page, and it would be a cityscape. And so you would have to start on that panel. Obviously, it doesn't matter where you come from, you're going to start at the top. But then he wanted to draw the eye down to the panel below that on the left-hand side. How would he do that? Because again, he's incorporating more forms of graphic design that would break the standard way of people looking and understanding what you're going to find in a comic. And he would do that by incorporating a Dutch angle into how the shot on the top panel, which again goes from side to side, would portray the buildings. And those buildings would be a Dutch angle. If you don't know, it's a crooked angle. So the buildings would look like they're basically 45 degrees or a little less than 45 degrees. And so that 45-degree angle on the buildings of, let's say, New York would then draw the eye from the very top, which would have a little dialogue box saying New York City, and then it would draw the eye downwards at a 45-degree angle looking at the buildings to your left-hand bottom corner panel. And I think this is something we need to return to right now. I see a lot of people that are more enamored with the 90s style of storytelling than the 80s right now, probably because they grew up with it. A lot of people in the indie comics scene where I am, anyways, with Indiegogo and you get Iron Age people and CG people and things like that. And they focus on a lot of the hyper masculine, hyper extreme things that come out within these 90s comics, but they don't focus on the fundamentals of these characters and creators that they tried to use. Now, I will say right now, the Image guys most probably lost the fundamentals as they moved into Image and started to do more and more what they wanted to. And this is something which, again, they talk about. They talk about the fact that Rob Liefeld, and they make fun of him because you got a bunch of guys from Image and they were making fun of Rob because he couldn't do good anatomy. And he was saying, yeah, I can't do good anatomy. I know I can't do good anatomy. And the thing is that I make up for that by being consistent. And his examples in the interview was, look at Jack Kirby. Jack Kirby didn't have good anatomy, and he didn't, but he was consistent, and then he drew the audience along with what he was doing consistently. And the other example, the modern example at that time, which was again late 80s, was Walter Simonson, and he doesn't have good anatomy either. And again, he was able to, be consistent and draw his audience along that way. But I don't think that's the case anymore. You can't do that anymore because comics are not that big. Not everybody's reading comics, and you don't have people, again, where I am in the indie comic scene, you don't have that much time, or you don't have a monthly comic that you put out to people in order to teach them what your style is and get used to it. Again, this is one of the things that I think when I covered Frank Miller and his newer books, people don't like it. Why? Because they liked it at one point because he kept them up with what he was doing by constantly putting out books, and people were used to it. And that's exactly because, again, Frank Miller can't do anatomy very well. And so he was able to habituate people to his style. But again, that habituation is not there anymore. And if you're an indie comic producer, it's not going to be there because you don't have that much time to connect to your audience. So you have to use the old tricks of how to get back to the panel layout, which is the Z panel layout, and show your audience exactly how to read a comic within the first couple of pages of the book, so that they understand, even if it's the first time they picked up a North American comic, how to read a comic without you having to instruct them how to do it. And you'll see that in a lot of these pages here. And I give at the end of this little thing, you've probably seen it 2 or 3 times now, the old Conan the Barbarian sequentials that were given in the newspaper. It's 1, 2, 3. Again, those are easy sequentials. Everybody knows in North America that you start on the left-hand side. So you only got 3 panels in a line. It's fairly easy to understand what's going on and how to follow them. But at the same time, you'll notice from some of those panels that the dialogue boxes, which is the narration, also overlap from some of those panels to draw the eye from one panel to another from left to right, which is, again, very simple and easy way of sequentially showing the people how to move from one panel to the other. This one right here, this John Buscema page from Thor, you'll see that on the second panel, Thor is speaking, I think it's Thor there, and his word balloon is overlapping from the second panel to the third panel. Again, draws your eye from panel 2 to panel 3. That kind of simplistic thing needs to be done. And I'm going to show you an example of, let me see, I'm going to turn this one off and we'll come back to that. I'll come back to some of those. I'll show you an example of this, of what I'm talking about right now. And I know I'm going more than 20 minutes, my normal 20 minutes for this, but okay. Here we have on the left a page from Captain America, and on the right a page from Doctor Strange. These are both, I think, 70s books. But anyways, on the left with the Captain America, you have a page, which I'm covering up some of it with my icon. Sorry about that. But there's basically only the 2 caption boxes, and that's it, at the beginning and at the end. And you see the caption box at the top. It connects the first one to the second one to the third one, and you're reading from left to right because that's one of the things. People do understand still, hopefully still, how to read English if they're going to pick up a comic book. So they're going to read English from left to right, from top to bottom. So you use that as an example of how to draw the reader's eye from the sequence of panel 1 to panel 2 to panel 3 by doing exactly what they do here, which is putting it at the panel 1 corner and then having it lap over to panel 2, lap over to panel 3. This is a very simplistic way of doing it. Now you see at the top of and the thing is that within the Captain America one, that's just enough. And then they allow the reader no dialogue, no nothing, in order for them to enjoy the fight. And so hopefully they can follow the Z pattern of reading after that. So it doesn't give you too much in the way of how to draw the eye from panel to panel. But this Doctor Strange page, this is exactly what I'm talking about. First of all, you have at the top of the page an entire block of text. Again, that gets the eye used to moving from top to bottom, from left to right, because everybody knows how to read English if you're picking up a comic in English. And so, again, it gets the mind going from top to bottom, from left to right. And then you have, I would call each of these heads of Doctor Strange a panel in themselves. If I was writing the script, the head of Doctor Strange that's half off the page on the far left, that's panel 1. And then it bleeds into panel 2, overlapping, and then the next head is panel 3, and then that overlaps onto the bottom of the ocean one, which is panel 4, and that next head one is panel 5. So the thing is, once again, your eye is moving because of the words on the top, from left to right, from top to bottom, and then you're going into the panels themselves. The one that's half off the page is a way to draw your eye and to say, this isn't fully on page, therefore start here. And then that moves on to the next panel, which is overlapping, and then to the next head, which is overlapping the second panel and the third panel. And again, it draws the eye. You'll see how it draws the eye in exactly that Z pattern, because you're reading up top at the very first, that entire text box, and then you're going straight to that first head, which is half off page, and then back down. And this is showing you this Z pattern of reading within comics. This is, again, with this page, it's a master class of the basics of how to draw the eye from one panel to another and get the reader to follow the action in a almost unconventional way, but at the same time, this is the thing we need to get back to, with the simplicity of storytelling, at the very least within your first couple of pages. Now, I usually have a splash page within either page 1 or page 2, and that's something, again, which is, going back to the old Marvel style of how to create a comic. But again, let me see if I'll put that other background up, of the panels as they sequence through with the slideshow. Again, here you have first page, right? With the you with the text at the top, shows you're going from left to right. And exactly this kind of thing, this simplistic way of storytelling needs to get we need to get back to doing it, because again, people don't understand how to read a comic page anymore. They just don't. And we want to bring in new readers, then this is what we got to do. Start simplistic. And that text box at the top, if it's big or small, it doesn't matter. That gets them used to going left, right, top, bottom. Here's another one with another Jack Kirby one, with which again gives you that prologue at the top, starting there with that word balloon or box, which is basically just in white, and then you move down to the dialogue balloon and then downwards. These kinds of splash pages are great for drawing in the eye for the reader, but at the same time great for getting the eye used to going in that Z pattern in order to understand the comic. And again, this is something, again, here you have a page from Conan. Same thing. You got the title at the top, and then you'll see you got the word boxes going from there, from left, which is highest, down a little farther with the right hand side. And again, this is not as complex as the other ones, but it still works in that way. This is what I tried to do with Crom the Destroyer, page 1. You'll notice that it's exactly what I'm trying to do. And I'll have to probably incorporate some more of these things the more I move forward. This is an older comic. This is something that with the Joan of Arc one, again, you got Joan of Arc, and you'll see that it's leading from left top right across with the title, and then into the first panel, the second panel, and the Joan of Arc crosses, both panels, as it were, to draw the eye in that way. So again, very simplistic things that we need to get back to from 80s and 90s comics that we need to take into consideration when reading them and putting them together. And again, a couple of these will cycle through to show you the Z pattern again. I'll start getting into some of these questions if you got any questions for me or comments or anything else, because this is something that really just struck me when I was listening to those old interviews with the Image guys before I think there were Image, Rob Liefeld and Jim Lee and all those guys. Willis, what is Willis Portico? I always pronounce his name in my head Portico, but I know that's not how you say his name. And all those guys. But let's see who's in the chat here, and I'll stop rambling. Let's see. Lost Applaud is here. How you doing? John's Longbox was here. Not sure if you're still here, John. I'll see if I can get down to where you left it, or if you're still here giving me comments. If you don't know, John has a channel of his own. He does showcases of great older comics. You get to see exactly the kinds of things I'm talking about. You go over to John's Longbox and you want to see some older comics, you go over there. He does a great showcase of those things. Let's see. I'll have to read the comments as well as I go down. So let's see. I'll be a little bit slow. Mystic is here. How you doing? Pedro is here. Tony is here. He says, bye, Crom. How are you, RJ? I am doing great. Let's see. Lost the Plot says, oh, I don't think he's talking to me. No, he's talking to somebody else, talking to the chat. Great. Random is here. How you doing, Random? John is still there, but I'm just scrolling down. Let's see. Elijah's here. How you doing? Elijah says he's considering buying Kit Fox. Kit Fox is done, by the way. The letterer just sent back the last pages of change. Link for those are in the description. You want to go to the Valiant Heroes and order Kit Fox. You can get it either as part of the graphic novel, which is 80. How many pages is it? It's more than 80 pages, I think. Or you can get it as a floppy. It's if you get it in the graphic novel format, it's one of the three main stories, and you have a backup story as well. Or you can get the three main stories as floppies. If you just want to buy it, it's $8. So yeah, I think we might start printing on Kit Fox fairly soon. So I don't know if I'll start, if anybody just orders Kit Fox, I don't know if I'll be shipping them out early or not. We'll see about that. So great to hear, Elijah. Let's see, scrolling down. Lost the Plot says, let's see. I think he's talking to John. Let's see. John and Lost Plot are having a good talk about Renzo and DuckTales. All right, scrolling down a little bit. Not sure any of that is for me. Pedro says, make comics great again. Yes, that's exactly what I want to do here. Let's see. Mystic says, make comics fun again. Sounds like someone's running for publisher or DC or Marvel. Yeah, if I was to say such a thing at DC and Marvel, they would just, they'd probably never look at me to begin with. Let's see. John says, RJ is the patriarch. RJ, is the patriarch a hero? Well, yeah. Patriarchy is not a bad thing. You look historically, patriarchy is the thing that what keeps civilization running. I'm sorry, but it does. I know most people don't like because they've been contaminated by the progressive way of thinking so much right now. But you go back to the Roman Empire again. How many times do you think about the Roman Empire and you get back to the Roman Empire? The paterfamilia, the father of the house, the patriarch, which is what the paterfamilia was. That was the backbone of Roman society and so much medieval society as well. But I'm not sure if you're talking about a comic character or not, John. You might be talking about a comic character called the Patriarch. Oh, yeah. That's what it is. John is writing his own comic, and he let me read some of it. Yes, John is writing his own comic, and the superhero's name is the Patriarch. So, yes. Let's see. Scrolling down. Pedro is here. Mystic says, Bronze Age will be my favorite age. I don't even say ages anymore because it's too amorphous. I just go with the decades. So it's the 80s for me. Tony is here and says, what do you think of mainstream comic companies' tendency to maim, cripple, and murder their core characters during the 90s? It was just too much extreme shock. Again, it was part of the 90s. It was just, again, if you didn't live through the 80s, movies and the 80s action movies were a thing unto themselves. I did a whole video about this at one time. And it was not something that you would have seen prior to in mainstream movies. And it was, again, it was a cultural phenomenon in the 80s, the action. And in the 90s, they just tried to one up the 80s. This is why I don't like the 90s so much. In the 90s, they just tried to one up the 80s by taking everything to the extreme, and that would include the gore and the violence. So, it worked better in the 80s in the way that it was, again, much more toned down. And I just lost my place where I was in the chat. So I'm going to have to scroll up, and then scroll down. Okay, let's see here. Michael is here. Hey, how you doing, Michael? I started early. Yes, I did. I wanted to see if I could get anybody else in here because I know some people on the East Coast find it a little bit late. So I decided to start early tonight. Let's see who else we got here. Samuel is here. He says, dang, when did they abandon the podcast? That was like your that was like you're in the minds of the postmodern creators. Do you have another place to listen to them and keep up? Yeah, well, they do have some of the podcasts at Marvel that are still going on, but they're severely curtailed. Used to be that they would come out with a new podcast every week, and it would be so many things going on at Marvel. Now they've pared it down to about 4, and even those are very tame compared to what they used to be. But still, you get to see them trying to hide their agenda now, which is they're not coming out and saying it, but we already heard them come out and say it for the last 10 years. So you know exactly where they're going with it. So I still get to listen to some of that. Let's see, scrolling down here. Michael says, someone gave a manga a 1-star review on Amazon stating the book was printed backwards. Yeah, see, that's the thing. Again, this is what I'm talking about. A lot of people who are just, brought up on manga, they don't understand the basic way that their mind is not wired. Let's put it that way. They might understand it, but their mind's not wired to go top to bottom, left to right, or that the book is entirely backwards because that's the way Japanese is printed in books. So that kind of thing. Let's see, scrolling down, see if we got any other comments. A couple of people here. I'm not sure if you've been here before. Movie theater King Bird Storm 8000. Okay, welcome. If you haven't been here before, I can't remember that long a moniker for, so you might have been here. I don't remember. He says, I wonder how he would feel about looking into Naruto. Again, I don't mind manga. It's just that my mind is wired towards North American comics. Pedro says, RJ, tell me if any of this titles ring a bell to you. Hack Slash, Halloween Man, Army of Darkness. Hack Slash does ring a bell, although I don't know from where off the top of my head. Halloween Man, I don't know of. Army of Darkness, obviously. Everybody knows Army of Darkness that grew up in the 80s. But have you, let's see, I don't know if you're just talking about North American, because there is a manga anime called Hack Slash, I do believe, as well. Maybe it's something to do with North American stories. I'm not sure. So let me know, Pedro, if you're talking exclusively about North American stories there. Let's see. Samuel is here and he says, I plan to make my own comic in a few years. My inspiration will be the 70s and 80s era with some Eisner sprinkled in. Oh, that's great. That I'm really happy about that. Honestly, people just need to get to creating. But again, learn as you go. Sometimes that's the best thing to do. Unfortunately, I would love to take years and study the exact way to make comics like they used to, but I just don't have the time. So I'm going to learn as I go. And hopefully I'm going to keep up the pace of learning. This is partly, as I said before and a couple of weeks ago, this is partly why I'm doing these live streams, is because this forces me to learn something new about making comics every week. And hopefully I'm going to incorporate that into what I'm going to do with making comics and make them better and better. And so every week with learning something new, I learn something that's going to make my comics better. And so I'm trying at the very least. I'm not going to say I know it all and this is how you make comics. I'm going to continue to learn all the time. Lost the Plot says storytellers have forgotten there are other people. If you want to tell the story you want to tell, but a diary, if you want to make good stories, remember the fans and the audience. Well, I completely agree. This is what you get with North American comics today. It's just a diary of the author. That is just complete nonsense. If you want to have something like that, then have a first person storyteller and then have them run up against a lot of what they don't understand. That's the great thing about first person storytelling. My novel manuscript that I wrote and tried to get published, that's from a first person story perspective. And when I started writing first person, it was what I was missing for so many years, trying to get a story out. And the thing is that it's limited in how you understand the world, or how mm, the main character understands the world, and that limitation is also conveyed to some extent to the reader, and you get to bump up against other people and things that you don't understand. And that's one of the things that, again, your quote unquote progressive authors don't get, because they think that, again, everything should just come naturally to you and understand everything naturally. No, that's not the way things work. And so your diary, which, even if it is told in first person, does not work. So let's see. Lost the Plot and Samuel are having a conversation about something, so I'll stay out of that. All right, who else we got here? Jen, how you doing? Hey RJ, did you ever end up seeing my animation? I think I did see some of it, but a lot of people do send me animation, honestly. So I'm not entirely sure which one it was. Because I do have I think it's the private messages with Twitter. I do have a bunch of them in there as well. So unfortunately, I can't tell you right off the bat what I think of it, because it might be someone else's that I'm thinking of. Let's see. Samuel says, what issue is that, a Joan of Arc story? Anyways, I think I'm going to try looking for it. I don't remember. I really don't remember where I got it from. The best way, if you want to figure it out, is take a screen capture of it from this video and then go to reverse image search and find out where it's from. That would be my guess. I had to find it off the top of my head. Let's see, scrolling down. Herp Derp is here. How you doing? Don't know if he's talking to me or not. He's talking to Sam. Sound Engraver is here. How you doing, Sound Engraver? Hopefully I'm not lecturing people. I'm just giving you my 2 cents on what I learned this week about making comics and how I integrate it into what I already know. So it's not a whole lot of lecturing, hopefully, anyways. And I think I'll leave these panels on the page or on the background for a little bit. And I always give a shout out to Sound Engraver as well. She has a YouTube channel of her own. She talks about some cultural issues that are going on today, just like I do, but focusing on the musical aspect of a lot of things. So if you want to go over to Sound Engraver's channel and give her a subscription, that'd be great. John is still here, or was here a moment ago. John says, I am still listening on my commute to work. Great to hear, John. All right. I was going to say, don't crash your car, but you commute to work on the subway or the train, don't you, John? So great. I don't know how well. If you're in the middle of the night, you're probably quiet enough to hear my voice. So great to hear you, John. Thanks for being here. And again, go over to John's channel and give him a subscription. He has a great channel with comic showcases for older comics. Let's see. Scrolling down. Scrolling down. Pedro says, I love and hate when Westerns try imitating Easterners and vice versa. Gives you perspective of how people see each other. Yeah. I don't know who it was I was talking to on Twitter. Somebody DM'd me, and I'm not sure who it was off the top of my head. But they talked about, why is it that manga and anime get Christianity so wrong all the time? And it's because they don't understand Christianity. Christianity is pretty much a foreign thing within Japan, even though there is, Christianity there. It's not very big. And historically, and this is just historical fact, the governments of Japan and the rulers of Japan basically taught over hundreds of years now the people of Japan to basically ignore religion and not pay it any mind. And that's one of the things that they did historically. And so they don't understand Christianity. And so when you see it in anime and manga, it's not really Christianity that they're describing. They're just describing the, I don't know, the faux interpretation of Christianity that they have. Or if you get into something like Evangelion, the author himself states right out, he doesn't know anything about Christianity. There's Christian themes going through Evangelion all the way. And people keep on thinking it's a Christian metaphor for this and that and the other thing. And the creator said, no, I just thought it was a cool motif. I really don't know anything about these things. So yeah, it is very interesting, Pedro. I would agree. Let's see. Scrolling down. Let's see. Who else we got here? Elijah is here and says hello to Sound Engraver. Let's see. Scrolling down. Samuel says, yeah, that Roman Empire trend is hilarious. I even became self-aware of how much I think about Rome every day. Well, I forgot to put this. Oh, actually, I didn't forget to put this. I kind of cut this out of my last video because my last video was almost 40 minutes long. So it was way too long to begin with. But I always thought that I thought about those kinds of things more than regular people, but apparently I don't. But the thing is that I would think about it most probably every day because I use Latin and Greek every day. I just got so fed up with my inability to read Latin and Greek fluently because I can parse Latin and Greek. And, as long as I have ample time, I can, sit down with my dictionary and get through it fairly easily. But I never really, even though I studied it for so long, I never really got to a stage where I could read it fluently without having to have some references. So I decided a while ago that, yeah, I'm going to read something in Greek and something in Latin every day. So I still do that to this day. So I use Latin every day. And besides that, if you follow me on Twitter, you might know that I'm a Catholic and I'm a very old school Catholic. And so I use Latin there every day. And at the same time, again, using the reading of Latin and Greek and stuff like that. So yeah, I do think about Latin things and Roman things pretty much every day. And again, if you're a Christian, I mean, the central point of the entire history of Christianity is crucifixion, and that happened under the watch of the Roman Empire. So yeah, that's kind of something. Again, if you're a Christian, the crucifixion is usually forefront in your mind, and so who doesn't think about the Roman Empire or its connection to it? There's so many things that draw your mind to Rome. The places where I live, again, you got old architecture where you have government buildings that actually not where I live. I mean, the closest city to me, which is still quite a trek, but still they have Roman architecture, things like that. So yeah, I was going to put that in my last video and talk about that, but I didn't have the time to squeeze it into the 40-minute video that I did, thinking that, oh, this will be a nice short video I could do. Yeah. Okay. Scrolling down. Let's see. Scrolling down. Vaz is here. He says, I got here late, so I'm catching on. Excuse me. Vaz, you didn't get here late. I just started early because I wanted to give an opportunity to people who normally don't get to see my live streams because they're too late for them. So hopefully you can catch up and get some of your questions or comments in here before I have to leave. I've already been talking for the last 50 minutes. Let's see. Tony says, to have a red gladiator. It was main inspiration for Superman. No, I haven't. I don't think. I always thought the main inspiration for Superman was a strong man. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. An actual strong man from a circus. So you combine that with something like Doc Savage. So I'd never heard of this being as an inspiration of Superman, honestly, Tony. So no, it doesn't sound familiar to me. Scrolling down. Elijah says, RJ, what do you think of 70s comics? I think they are great. that when the characters, especially DC characters, became the way we know them today, plus anti-hero characters rose. I really don't think. No, I remember 70s comics, and until Crises on Infinite Earths, very, very few DC comics actually began to be serious. Um, Funny enough, it was oh, not Marv Wolfman, but Jim Shooter working on Legion of Superheroes that dragged DC kicking and screaming into um, continuity and serious comic storytelling. Not a whole lot of serious comic storytelling there, although again, there was serious storylines, but again, it always went back to there's no continuity, therefore there's no connection. So for DC, it wasn't until Crisis on Infinite Earths that things really heated up with continuity and really serious storytelling in my mind. Even though, again, you go back to the 70s with things like The Great Darkness or DC Comics Presents with Superman and War World, things like that. You're certainly going to get story arcs sometimes, which are covering more than one book. But at the same time, again, because of the lack of continuity, it wasn't my favorite bit of storytelling. And you still had the bad taste in your mouth if you lived in the 70s, which I did, of the campy storytelling for so many of the characters. But yeah, to me, it would be the early 80s. I think Crisis on Infinite Earths was 81, if I remember correctly. And it wasn't until that DC, anyways, got into serious storytelling. On the other hand, if you had Marvel, Marvel was serious in the 70s, but at the same time, they were not incorporating the best storytelling because they had already lost Jack Kirby, and they were trying to bring in a lot of different kinds of storytellers. And you got things like Bloodstone and, oh, I can't remember some of these books. Um, and you got a lot of, oh, I don't know, Master of Kung Fu and things like that. A lot of them were not good storytelling, although Master of Kung Fu did have some, some good storytelling here and there. Excuse me 1 second. Sorry about that. I just didn't want to cough into my mic. But yeah, to me, the real serious storytelling took over in the 80s. In the 70s, it was feeling out the serious storytelling, if you ask me, from someone who was reading off the spinner rack in the 70s. But that's just my point of view, Elijah. Um, let's see, scrolling down, scrolling down. Well, I'm getting to the bottom, or I might be getting to the bottom. Vaz says, RJ, what comic book age do you prefer the way they do layouts? If that wasn't already answered. Again, I would have said prior to this week that it would have been the 80s, quite honestly, because they they didn't have such a stodgy style as you would get previous, but they were very simplistic. You're looking at the background with Jack Kirby here, and this is very simple 9-panel layout and things like that. Quite honestly, like Keith Giffen's 9-panel layout in his Legion of Superheroes in the 80s, I picked up the first couple of books and it took me a couple of issues to get used to it. But after that, it was 9 panels for me. 9 panels, 9 panels. I didn't want anything from Keith Giffen except 9 panels. And even though he would sometimes stretch a scene over multiple panels, there would still be the panel breaks and the panel cutters. So to me, it would be the 80s. But again, that's not to say, as I talked about at the first of this video, that the other decades, and that would include the 90s, didn't have something to contribute to an understanding of panel layout and the best way to do it. And that's exactly what I'm talking about within this entire live stream. That, again, I don't think that you can take, this is what I'm trying to say with this video. If you go back to Will Eisner's statements about you have to connect with your audience and you have to connect in their minds the way of reading a story that they automatically understand within sequential art. And I don't think that you can right now apply, or in any decade apply, the standards of a previous decade exactly as it has been done. So you can't take the 80s and do it exactly now in the 2020s. You just can't, even though I think it is the best, excuse me again, the best panel layout is in the 80s. You can't just apply that and slap it down on a page today, you have to understand your audience, where they're coming from, and how well they can understand sequential art and the ability to read in a North American way. And this is part of the Will Eisner way of understanding pictorials as if it was a language in itself. And so this is one of the things I was going to say. This is one of the things you can take AI art and you can feed into it everything that you can within comic panel layout and sequential art and all that kind of stuff, but it still can't think. And if it can't think, it's not going to be able to connect to your audience in order to understand how the audience can understand and pictorials and sequential art as a language. It just can't keep up with the natural changes. So again, yeah, I'm sorry, Vaz, if I beat that dead horse there, but yeah, I would say the 80s, although you would have to, if you are putting together a comic today, incorporate some other things into it. Let's see. Pedro says, RJ, you think it's possible? You, you think is possible to do a comic without the text dialogue? If you do, have you ever seen a story like that? Do I think it's possible to do a comic without text dialogue? Well, you can do silent comics. I've certainly seen silent comics. You go back to Mobius. Mobius did silent comics. There are no words in his some of his comics, anyways. Especially they're bande dessinée, so they're not North American comics. They're French comics. But again, they're French comics, but you can buy them and read them because there's no words in them, so they're not really French. If you get my meaning, if that's what you're talking about, yeah, you can. But at the same time, I don't think that you can pull it off unless you're someone like Mobius who puts an extreme depth into the art. And so again allows for pictorial storytelling and sequential storytelling in a way that engrosses you so much that you're going to go back and read that story again. Because if you just do, even if you're a fairly good comic book artist and you do a silent comic within North America right now, it's going to be flipped through in 5 minutes and people are usually going to forget about it. Even though I think silent comics can be done, just, and again, here you have the silent panels of Jack Kirby and Stan Lee. So yeah, it can be done. And I'm going to do some silent comics myself if they're short comics, you know, backup stories, things like that. But again, the thing is that it's too quick to go through as a comic in itself sometimes. This is one of the things I talked to Mike Barron about, and I asked Mike Barron, did you ever write a silent comic? He said, no, absolutely not. He doesn't ascribe to any idea of silent comics at all, just because, they can get through it so quickly, and he's a writer. And so you want to express yourself as a writer. So yeah, there's that. But maybe you're talking about the dialogue boxes, Pedro. I'm not entirely sure, because yeah, you can do it without the dialogue boxes. I try to pare down the dialogue boxes in some of my comics as much as possible. Just right now, we're doing the lettering for Kit Fox over the last couple of weeks, and I have thought balloons for my characters, but my letterer put in dialogue boxes for the thought balloons. And I said, no, you're gonna have to go back and do the whole thing again because I want thought balloons, not dialogue boxes. Because again, I think that's much more intimate and a better way of storytelling. And people just got sick of dialogue boxes. I certainly do get sick of dialogue boxes the way that they use them today. So if you're talking about dialogue boxes, yeah, get rid of those as much as possible. Although I do use them in Crom a lot because that's the Robert E. Howard way of telling a story. And I'm trying to, again, invoke the Robert E. Howard way of telling a story. All right. So Pedro says, P.S. Yes, hack slash for Americans. I would love to see a movie of it someday. Just no, not in this time and age. Yeah, I can agree with you on that. If you love a property, pray that it doesn't get adapted right now. Samuel says, RJ, there's my 2 cents. Now, what's now? What are you going? Now, what are you going to me? Okay, I'm not entirely sure what you're saying there, Samuel, but I'll give you my 2 cents anytime. Scrolling down. Mystic says, I'll be selling my superhero novel at a book festival in my hometown, Lethbridge, Alberta. Interestingly, some current year comic writers will be attending. Well, great to hear, Mystic. Um, don't know if I know anybody in Lethbridge. I really don't. I do know some people in Alberta, but probably, where's Lethbridge, anyways? Is it in the north or the south? I know some people more close to, well, what's the name of that town up north that they do all the, not the mining in, but the oil rigs and stuff like that. But yeah, great to hear, Mystic. So if anybody's in Lethbridge, go over to whatever it is. If you want to stick it in the comments, Mystic, what the name of this book festival is, so people can from Lethbridge or around there in Alberta can go and pick up a copy of your superhero novel. All right, let's see. Herp Derp says, RJ, any words to say on ElfQuest? Almost un almost ubiquitous in the 80s and all but forgotten today. The authors even got cameos in a Claremont Marvel comic. Absolutely gorgeous artwork. Herp derp. One of the, I actually was talking to one of the artists for ElfQuest from the 80s to see if they would do Crom the Destroyer with me, quite honestly. I got connected to, not entirely sure, because there are different stages of ElfQuest, and there were different titles with different artists. So I can't remember the one off the top of my head because we only had small conversations. But Don Chin, great 80s indie comic producer and storyteller, got me in touch, who's a friend of mine. I would call Don a friend. He actually wrote a Kit Fox story that is going to be the backup story for Thomas Valiant #2, which is what we're producing right now. Started producing right now, although Don's part in it has been done for quite some time. So yeah, Don Chen got me connected to one of the artists for ElfQuest to see if he would do the art with me on some of my books, most notably Crom the Destroyer. But that kind of fell through. And then I went on to, of course, Jim O'Reilly and Nick Axe, who is doing the stuff with me right now for Crom the Destroyer, and we're moving right along on that. The art for that. Let me put this panel stuff up in the background. Actually, no, I'm talking about the great art from Crom the Destroyer. Let me put up some of this great art from Crom the Destroyer in the background, and then get back to the comments. You'll see Jim O'Reilly's stuff there, as well as Nick Axe's. So, oh, I thought I was getting to the end of the chat, but apparently, as usual, it's just skipping down on me. So yeah, ElfQuest was never something that I followed too heavily. That's because a lot of the time I would just get my books off the spinner rack, and ElfQuest was not something that you would normally find on a spinner rack. But yeah, ElfQuest was straight on through the 80s. It's one of those comics that is an 80s style, and it does have gorgeous artwork. I would agree. I'm not going to give up on possibly connecting once again with those ElfQuest artists to see if we can get something done. Let's see. Michael says Christianity was banned in Japan in 1637. Yes. I'm not sure what date it was, but yeah, I think it was, who was it? Francis of Assisi that took the major strains of Christianity to Japan. Prior to that, I can't remember St. Francis dates off the top of my head. But yeah, the funny thing was that after Christianity was banned, if you say it's 1633 or 1637, I'll take you at your word, Michael. I don't remember that date off the top of my head, but after it was banned, it went underground, and basically there was a Catholic community in the mountains, and it stayed there for almost 200 years, if not more, continuing with what they had been taught until Christianity was allowed to return. So yeah, um, great historical analysis if you wanted to read it or watch it on YouTube or something. Interesting stuff, to say the least. Let's see. Taz is here. How you doing? Great to be here again, he says. Well, great to have you, Taz. Scrolling down a little more. Da, da, uh, uh, okay, so someone asked me, "What are my thoughts on Vatican II?" Yeah, yeah, I'm a Catholic, but I'm not getting into that today. I'm not getting into that right now. Um, we'll just say I'll go with what is it, Paul the Sixth, that says um, it has described nothing magisterial except for what has been magisterially um, stated prior to that point. We'll go with that and leave it at that. If anybody knows what I'm talking about. So scrolling down. Um, Tony says yes, there used to be Catholic. They used to crucify Catholic missionaries in Japan. Well, not just Japan. They used to crucify. They used to disembowel them in England. So it's not something that um, is unique to Japan. Sound Engraver, thank you very much for the super chat. She says, "I wish I could give more after the wedding." No, that's fine. Thank you very much for the super chat, Sound Engraver. If no one knows what she's talking about, Sound Engraver is getting married to Professor Geek. So, yeah, congratulations all around to Sound Engraver and to Professor Geek as well. Scrolling down, and thank you once again, Sound Engraver. Samuel says, "Oh, let me hit this and put it on the main screen." Richard Meyer always talks about John Carter being the main inspiration for Superman, and after reading his stories, yeah, it's pretty much reverse Superman. Really, I I I am very familiar with some of the stories of John Carter, not all of them. I do have a giant tome of John Carter um, in my library here that I haven't got to read all the way through. I wouldn't have thought that, quite honestly. Uh, Scrolling down. Do. Scrolling down. Crisis on Infinite Earths was 85, 86. Really? I didn't think it was that late. Honestly, I didn't. Scrolling down. Samuel says, "Man from Earth is transplanted to a smaller planet of Mars with low gravity, giving him super strength, and he can leap very far." Yes, that's John Carter. John Carter in a nutshell. Let's see, scrolling down. Oh, yeah. Well, now I can see what you're talking about. I honestly had never thought of it that way, Samuel. Yeah, because so basically Superman is from a different planet and he comes to Earth and gets superpowers. So he would be John Carter, but Krypton would be Earth and Mars would be Earth. You know what I mean? I never even thought about that. I suppose that's very interesting. Let's see. Let's see. Tony says, "Why do you think that anytime they tried to make a major motion picture of a pulp character outside of the first Conan the Barbarian movie, they would always bomb at the box office?" Um, I would say they would bomb at the box office because not enough people remembered the character. They were playing off of some kind of nostalgia that they themselves, as the storyteller, would have, not understanding that that kind of nostalgia has faded away for most people in the general public, and therefore not enough understanding of the character in the general public still exists for them to understand the complexities of the stories, because Pulp Fiction did present to you very complex characters. The exception to that would be Conan, because he had survived in so many different kinds of mediums until the point where, again, even now, but to the point where you were able to make the Conan the Barbarian movie and people still were able to connect to that character in the original way, in some fashion. So yeah, that would be my thought on it. Although, quite honestly, even though I was a big Shadow fan, I always say, I went to my local library and picked up records of the old Shadow radio plays and used to listen to those when I was a kid. When the Shadow movie came out, I didn't mind it. A lot of people really didn't like it, but I didn't mind it at all. I thought it was pretty good. Not exactly the Shadow as you would get him in Pulp Fiction, but it was a good interpretation. All right, let's see. Oh, we got a $10 super chat. Thank you very much. The Big Red Snake. What is the big red snake? Just wondering the big red snake. But thank you very much for the $10 super chat. Could you do a video sometime about bats, soups, and Spidey? I noticed they actually help people and were usually the most popular. The rest fight their way. Fight. The rest fight their own issues, usually not helping normies. I think I did do a very early video that concentrated on I don't think it was so much Superman, although I do think, if I remember correctly, but this is like 6 years ago, Batman and Spider-Man. But again, um, maybe there was the one that I did talking mostly about Hawkeye and the different kinds of storytelling with different kinds of heroes. But it was a very early video that I did for my channel, probably 6 years ago. But I might, yeah, it's something that I could do in the future. That is a good idea for a video. Um, and it is something that I want to bring into my comics. But at the same time, we have the Valiant Heroes, and the point of those Valiant Heroes is that they see the quote unquote heroes around them and they don't help the little guy anymore. So they're not really heroic. So these heroes want to be that kind of grounded, heroic team. But at the same time, you're not going to get that for at least a couple of issues, or at the very least, the backup stories in the Valiant Heroes. You get the main backup story from the Valiant Heroes, which concentrates on Pulse and Feral, and they do try to at at some point, anyways. Not the entire book, and I don't think it's the main strain of the book either. But there is, help the little guy out, do that kind of thing. So yeah, that's a good idea for a video. I'll try to stick it in the back of my mind. Thank you very much again for the $10 super chat, the big red snake. All right. So I don't know how, by the way, how to connect these super chats to the top like everybody else does. I don't know. Someone tell me how to do that, because I noticed that other people in other live chats somehow take that super chat and stick it up to the top so that it appears at the top of the chat in YouTube. Maybe YouTube does it automatically. I don't even know. I'm not watching this on YouTube. I'm watching it on StreamYard as I speak to you. So let's see. Da-da-da, da-da-da. Scrolling down, see if there's anything. Oh, let's see. It hurts because it's true. What a great name. What a great name. It hurts because it's true. Cassandra Cain, Batgirl, was almost without text. You could breeze through it. But if you didn't slow down and read the images, you were indeed missing a lot of what was going on. Expert low text comic. Okay. I have never read that comic, so I'll take your word on that. But here's my question. Okay. First of all, for no text or low text comics, it might appeal to people who actually are online and, people, I'll just put it this way. A lot of people online right now have the attention span of a goldfish. So I think that's what some of the Marvel Infinity comics are trying to draw off of. And they're doing a spectacularly poor job of it because, again, they have crap art, and it's just the lowest tier of art that you could ever see on those Infinity comics. Really, I think they're just trying to test these people out to see if they can ever come and work for Marvel in some other capacity that's actual comics. But yeah, I think that's what they're trying to do over there. But at the same time, it doesn't work without high quality art, if you ask me. Let's see. Stress level is here. How you doing, stress level? Progressives are driven to destroy everything in spite. I'm not sure. I think that's a typo there. Of spite while never taking responsibility. It's all monkey paw wishes. That's a good way to describe it. I would agree. Their ideology is centered around destruction, if you ask me. Let's see. The big red snake says, the fourth age. 2 cents is a bats reference. Okay. BTAS. I'm not sure if that's meant to be an acronym. So it's not bats because it's BTAS. So I'm just reading it backwards. I did not know that. So thank you very much. Let's see. Mystic says Fort McMurray. That's what I'm thinking about. Fort McMurray's in the north. Lethbridge is in the south, close to the border. Is it? Okay. Good to know. If you want to know some, what is it? Albertan geography. There you go. Let's see. Oh, Mystic also says the festival is called Word on the Street. So if you're in Alberta or close to the Alberta border and you're going to Word on the Street, Mystic will be there selling his superhero novel. I think it was, not graphic novel. So you might want to look him up and see if he's there, or see if you can find him there, and give his novel a chance. I'm going to try to get through some of these chat questions a little faster, stop rambling on, just because it's getting to be about an hour and 15 minutes, and I still got a bunch of them to get through. Vaz says, did you ever read the old comic The Rise and Fall of the Trojan Empire by Don Lawrence? I'm curious, I guess it's a curious mix of old layouts like from the old Prince Valiant, but with sequential art and word balloons. I am familiar with it, but I don't think that I was able to read the entire thing. The only time I came across it was, again, with people using it as an example of what you're just talking about, Vaz. So I might have to look that up to see if I can find. There is, I'm not sure how old that would be, but there is a comic. There are actually two comic book archive sites that I go to that scan comics that are now in the public domain. So I'll go and look it up and see if it's that old, because if they're in the public domain, they're for free and you can go and just read them there. So I will take a look at that and see if I can find it. Let's see, scrolling down. Scrolling down. Herp Derp says, RJ, on the subject of low fantasy, track down an Adult Swim pilot from 2009 or so called Korgoth the Barbarian. It's a very amusing satire of classic barbarian genre. I think I know what you're talking about. I think. Not entirely sure. Is it because the one that I'm thinking of has very low, well, not say low resolution, but very, very, very cartoony, almost today cartoony way of doing what is it? Figures and things like that. So that might be what you're talking about. Korgoth. If I did run across it, it wasn't something that made a terrible impact on me. Let's see if any of these comments are for me. Talking about Superman and his origin story in the comments. Let's see. The big red snake says, let me just put this up on the screen. I'd have just said Arnold was becoming a big deal. Conan's after Arnie bombed. Yeah. Well, I would say Conan the Destroyer actually didn't do very well either, but that was because, well, I think it was because who wrote that story? I think it was Robert Jordan, actually, the writer of Wheel of Time, wrote the original. Actually, what it was now the credits for the movie are Roy Thomas. And I can't remember who else it was with Roy Thomas, who are the writers for Conan the Barbarian, the Marvel comic version. But if I remember correctly, there was a novel also done of the story, which was Robert Jordan. Now I don't know if Roy Thomas wrote the story before Robert Jordan, or Roy Thomas adapted the Robert Jordan story to make Conan the Destroyer. Anyways, it didn't work very well. I think it was more because of the fact that they were trying to get more people to see the movie, and so they had to bring it down to a PG-13 rating, which again just gave it a lack of edge. So yeah, but yeah, after Arnie, everything did go downhill. Let's see. Herp Derp. RJ, idea for an interview. A lot of copyrighted properties are going to be coming into public domain in the next few years, like Steamboat Willie. Perhaps a guest with a legal background. Well, that could be a good video, but I was thinking I don't know. It would have to be a legal background, of course, in copyright law. So I'm actually someone who unfortunately has to deal with lawyers a lot, just because my other business is does I deal with lawyers a lot. We'll just put it that way. Just my other business that I created. It was legal research, which I then have moved on from. But at the same time, I don't know a whole lot of copyright lawyers, nor do I know where you would even find a copyright lawyer, quite honestly. Let's see, scrolling down. Stress level says, I would like to see a dedicated Superman analysis. I'm not, we'll put it this way. I was going to say I'm scratching for videos as it is, but no, I'm not. I do sometimes have like 3, 4 videos stacked up in my head, and usually some of them just fall off, but I'm trying to intersperse with more heroic stuff again. So I'll take those things into consideration. Superman is a big task, though. Let's see, scrolling down and getting to the end of the chat. Oh no, it jumped again at me. Let's see. Herp Derp says yes again, talking about copyright, to explain the nuances and point out any potential risks. That would be something. Yeah, actually, that would be a good interview. That's a great interview idea. I don't know if I could track down someone to do that, but that is a great idea. Sound Engraver says, sorry, I didn't know about the super chat thing, RJ. I researched it myself. Useful. I don't know about the super chat thing. Yeah, neither do I. So we'll just leave it at that for now. I've only ever got like 3 super. No, I think it was you, Sound Engraver, and now the Big Red Snake, Taz, and I don't know if there was someone else that had ever given me a super chat. I don't know off the top of my head. I'd have to think back more than a month, and that's not something that I can do right now. Let's see. Scrolling down. The Big Red Snake says, the length of time it stays up is based on the value. I think lower donations disappear faster. Okay, if that's the way it goes. I I don't know if it actually shows up automatically. Michael says BTAS, Batman the Animated Series. Okay, that makes more sense to me now. um, Batman the Animated Series. It was a little bit after my time, although I was working on a farm at the time, and we would just slump into our seats at lunchtime. The half hour we were given to eat lunch, and Batman the Animated Series was on at that time, and a tiny little, I think like 16-inch black and white television. So I do know some of the storylines. Let's see. Scrolling down. That is not for me. Let's see. John, you're still here. Good heavens. Working at work, peeping in. Okay, John, you really need to concentrate on your work. John, if anybody doesn't know, is an electrician, and he does. He's actually, I think, a high-level electrician. So, John, concentrate on your work. So I think I've gotten to the bottom of the chat. Thank you very much, everybody, for showing up. I don't remember what the number for how many people we got into the chat at once. I think it was 28, 29. Thank you very much for everybody coming in here and talking about comics, talking about the fun things about comics, because again, we need to make comics fun again. This is part of the reason. Oh, I got to take John off the screen. This is one of the reasons that, oh yeah, John, what are you saying? Oh, he has to wait for the, John says, have to wait for the Port Authority to clear us to work. Okay, John. As long as you're not putting anybody's life in danger, yeah, you don't want to be doing that. But as I was saying, we have to make comics fun again. That's one of the things that I like about 80s comics. 90s were too extreme, too heavy on the death and gore, too much. We're going to make this, everything is going to go in a way that's going to be dark. No. 80s comics, while they did have intricate storytelling and were very, we'll just say, Marvel in the way that they dealt with continuity and given it to you straight, there was just enough of that old campy style of comics still in the background to make comics fun. And that's one of the reasons why I love the 80s. And so again, that's why I decided now for this live stream, and maybe going forward, I'll talk about making comics fun again. So hopefully you will help me make comics fun by showing up in the chat. And thank you once again to everybody who's shown up. And I am going to take off. We've been talking for about an hour and 25 minutes. I will leave you once again with the short trailer for Crom the Destroyer. Again, links are in the description for Crom the Destroyer, The Valiant Heroes, and you can pick up Thomas Valiant at either of those campaigns if you buy one of those books. And on the checkout, you can buy Thomas Valiant as well. And we got a whole lot of goodies besides on those campaigns. Check out my campaigns if you haven't got the chance just to see what's there. And I will leave you again with the second trailer for Crom the Destroyer. Thank you very much for everybody for showing up. And thank you very much for everybody for the super chats. All right. I'll see you later. Bye.
No matter how many wars you fight, no matter how much blood you shed, no matter how much rage you loose, no matter how many demons you face, no matter how many companions you lose, no matter if our kingdom falls, I know that you will return to me in honor.